The MSI GeForce RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X is one expensive graphics card and one of the best models using the Nvidia GA102 graphics processing unit. It has no less than 24GB of GDDR6X memory and uses the all-new 16-pin power connector. In addition to the trim fan cooling system, a massive triple slot heatsink and a price tag of over $2,000 US. The MSI RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X is a large graphics card thanks to its massive triple slot construction. In fact, this graphics card is almost as large as the engine in my car, not as oily though. In addition, the RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X uses the Nvidia GA102 graphics processing unit. The car uses a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. The graphics card uses addressable RGB LEDs. The car uses halogen bulbs. Yet somehow both these objects are valued almost the same in the world today. Moving on, the RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X is thick and heavy with a weight of over 2.1 kilograms and a thickness of 6.5 centimeters. In fact, it will dwarf an original Nvidia GTX 480 and even take up more than half the length of a car engine. For accessories, you get a power adapter for the new 16-pin connector, a graphics card holder to prevent the sagging of the graphics card, and a mousepad with the MSI graphics. And that's it. When we talk about the design, things are simple to understand. This graphics card follows the same design language as the rest of the MSI Suprim series, with a brush texture on the front and back and a light grey and dark color grey combination. Even though this graphics card does have plenty of addressable RGB LEDs, it's not as ostentatious as other RTX series models. It also does not suffer from overly exposed gaming-inspired graphics or plastic elements. The fans used on the RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X are made by Power Logic and have the model number PLD110B12HH. These fans have a minimum speed of 1030 RPM and a maximum speed of 3200 RPM. In addition, all three fans will completely stop when the graphics card is under a center temperature. Usually it's 50 degrees Celsius on the graphics core. From a design perspective, these fans have a semi-ring impeller design. Basically, only half of the impellers are attached by a plastic ring, in this case semi-ring. Other than that, it's the usual impeller design with notches and different textures to reduce the noise output and increase the airflow and static pressure. On the back of the graphics card, we have a solid metal backplate, which sports not one but two linear brushed textures, virtually the same but in different directions. On the right side of the graphics card, the MSI Dragon logo stands tall and looks like it's made from metal, even though it's clear plastic, and it's clear because this logo will lighten up when the graphics card is in use. Finally, on the end of the graphics card, the backplate has a perforated design. This is present to allow the hot air of the heatsink to exit faster. In terms of the outputs, the RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X has 3 DisplayPort's 1.4a ports and a single HDMI 2.1 port. The grille on this side of the graphics card has an angular design that allows for easy passage of air and acts as a secondary exhaust port. For power, the RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X uses the all-new Nvidia 16-pin connector. This connector is so new that a lot of power supplies will require an adapter for it. This new connector was needed as these graphics cards were pushing past the wattage that was delivered through regular PCIe connectors. This new 16-pin power connector can deliver upwards of 600 watts alone. Next to the power connector, the bias selection switch is installed. This switch does exactly what it says. It will toggle between two pre-configured bias setups, one called gaming and the other silent. The difference is in speed of the fans, and please only switch this on or off when the graphics card is turned completely off. On the top part of the graphics card, we have the Nvidia Sli Connector. However, given the state of multi-graphics card support for video games and software, you will rarely use this connector. With the heatsink removed, we get to see why this graphics card is so big. The heatsink alone is almost 2 kilograms in weight and the same in thickness. This thing is made from solid aluminum with nickel-plated copper heat pipes. In fact, the heatsink uses no less than 8 heat pipes and 2 stacks of cooling fins. The contact with the graphics card components is done through a separate metal plate that has thermal pads installed. This plate contacts the graphics core, VRM components and the memory chips. The backplate is not only ornamental, as it has plenty of thermal pads placed underneath and will aid with passively cooling of the components on the top part of the PCB. With everything removed from the graphics card, we get a better look at what the components are. The RTX 3090 Ti Suprim has a 24-phase VRM design, with Dr. Mouse chips used for controlling the graphics card voltage. These are made by Monolithic Power Systems and have the model number MP86957. These chips are also used on the 4-phase VRM of the memory. The voltage management is taken care of by a brand new Monolithic Power Systems digital LLC controller, which has the model number MP2891. The GDDR6X memory chips used in this graphics card are made by Micron and have the model number D8BZC. These chips are running at a frequency of 1313 MHz. Although this graphics card is classier than the other models, it still uses a lot of addressable RGB, so many in fact that it requires a dedicated RGB controller chip to handle everything LED related. This chip is made by ITE, with the model number 8295FN-56A. This is not a new controller and it has been used in a lot of graphics cards that use LEDs, dating back to the RTX 2000 series. Speaking of RGB, this graphics card has a lot of them, as I've said before, on the sides with not only the Suprim logo but a line that goes across the entire length of the cooling system. On the top, on the right side, in the shape of the MSI Dragon logo and in between the fans. All of this can be controlled through the MSI software or left on its own devices. Before we head into the testing segment of this review, you will get to hear the graphics card going from its idle status with the fans switched off all the way to its maximum RPM. I am doing this because while a decibel value is useful for comparison, it will not highlight unwanted noises such as bearing ticking, unbalanced fans, or wind noise. With a maximum speed of 3200 RPM, the MSI RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X reached a maximum noise output of 41 decibels, with the measuring device placed at a distance of 10 cm away from the system and graphics card. This value was reached with the fans of the graphics card left on their factory fan profile while using the gaming BIOS. In that configuration, they reached a maximum speed of 2000 RPM. Given the cooling system used on this graphics card, you will never have to use the fans at their maximum speed, thus measuring them at that RPM would be pointless. In terms of the temperature, through the entire testing period, the graphics card did not go above 78 degrees Celsius with an ambient temperature of 26 degrees Celsius. All testing is done inside a Be Quiet Dark Base 900 case and with an Intel i9 9900K CPU running at its factory boost frequency. The system has a total of 64 GB of DDR4 memory and adequate cooling at all times. The first test uses a Cyberpunk 2077 video game running at 1080p with all settings set to their maximum values and ray tracing set to medium, with DLSS turned off. And in this game, the MSI RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X reached an average frame rate of 123 frames per second, a low 1% frame rate of 114 frames per second, and a 0.1% frame rate of 98 frames per second, overshadowing the RTX 2070 Super. The usage of average, low 1% and 0.1% values is done because they consider the various dips in the performance across the entire testing period. A simple average frame rate value will not reflect the true performance of the graphics card, as the frame rate will go up and down based on what happens in the video game. The next test is Red Dead Redemption 2, a popular video game that overshadowed Grand Theft Auto 5 from a story perspective. This game is running at 1080p and with all settings turned to their maximum values, and in this game the MSI RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X reached an average frame rate of 110 frames per second, a low 1% frame rate of 89 frames per second, and a 0.1% frame rate of 76 frames per second. Again, a great result in a demanding open world game that has plenty light sources, textures and particles. The third test is Metro Exodus, the latest game in the Metro series, a game that is famous for having some levels to be overly demanding on the graphics card. This game is running at 1080p DirectX 12 mode with all settings turned to their maximum value and vertical synchronization disabled. And in this game, the graphics card reached an average frame rate of 214 frames per second, a low 1% frame rate of 202 frames per second, and a 0.1% frame rate of 189 frames per second. The first test is the Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, running at 1080p with all settings turned to their maximum values and hairworks is disabled. And in this test, the RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X reached an average frame rate of 272 frames per second, a low 1% frame rate of 263 frames per second, and a 0.1% frame rate of 244 frames per second. In this game alone, the performance gain is over 110 frames per second when compared to the RTX 2070 Super. The final video game test is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, running at 1080p in DirectX 12 mode with all settings set to their maximum value and pure hair set to disabled. And in this test, the RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X reached an average frame rate of 274 frames per second, a low 1% frame rate of 267 frames per second, and a 0.1% frame rate of 191 frames per second. And just like in the case of the Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, the performance gain over the RTX 2070 Super is impressive, with over 130 frames per second. However, testing is not done yet as graphics cards are not just for playing games and it's not always free. Given that the RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X uses the new 16-pin power connector because the older PCIe power connectors couldn't handle the power draw, we can assume that the power consumption with this graphics card will be a bit higher than what we had with the previous generation. But nobody could prepare me for a measured power draw of 523 watts at peak and 510 watts at full load in a benchmark. And this is why the MSI RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X has a massive triple slot cooling system, as you need such a heatsink to cool down 500 watts worth of heat. The MSI GeForce RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X is impressive and looks excessive, but not without reason. At first glance, you'd think that this graphics card is the poster child of what's wrong with the industry, from massive heatsinks and power draws to high prices across all markets and excessive RGB. However, the MSI RTX 3090 Ti Suprim X is not that. It is expensive, yes, at over $2,000 and even at $1,600, as some might see that in some areas of the world, it's still expensive. The power draw is also high, but that's not entirely MSI's fault, as all RTX 3090 models have a high power consumption. The triple slot cooling system is required to handle the massive 500 watts power draw, and it does so just fine. In fact, even at full load in gaming, this graphics card is quiet and you will barely hear it over the case fans in your system. In terms of the raw performance, until the RTX 4000 series models will debut on the market, this graphics card is one of the best available on the market, outperforming everything, even some RTX 3090 Ti models. However, that is relevant as each RTX 3090 Ti model has its strengths and weaknesses. The highlight of the Suprim X though is not only its design, which is mile ahead of everyone else apart from the exclusive models, it's also its cooling system, which manages to cool the graphics card while not being loud, and that's impressive especially for an air cooler. The biggest drawback of this graphics card though is the price. Even at its discounted price, it's still too much for just a graphics card that will be outperformed in less than a year by the RTX 4000 series. Only time will tell how these graphics cards will age. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and if you want to support me in a direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and the Subscriber Star pages of this channel.